again. You and I haven't hosted together, so I'm really excited. This is it's our first date.
It is. I love it.
I'm really looking forward to it.
I think this is going to be an awesome day. So let's get started.
I'm ready.
With Q, and it says the Mid-South U.S. It says you're a former Catholic questioning. So it says here that you are curious about the definitions of theism, atheism, anti-theism. Do you want to start off talking about that?
Sure, that would be great. And that's actually the nature of my call and my question. And it has to do with listening to Matt and others as well, talking about logical constructions and how he has basically laid out that the opposites are theism and atheism. And I'm kind of coming around to a sentiment where I think if I was going to be honest with myself, I would characterize my mental view of this as anti-theism because of certain things that have happened in my life, certain things that I have educated myself about. I just think that the whole idea of religion is a construct that human beings have created in order to address some of the psychological and physical needs that we have, and also in our inability to really reconcile the fact that we all die.
Okay, that was a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, well, let's start off with the definitions. So theism is...
Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second and say that although this has got really not a huge amount to do with my interest in the issues that come up linked to science, I would say that all this stuff about different types of views about religion and non-religion and what you classify yourself as, the one thing I would say is if you haven't read it, then I'm kind of looking at it on my other screen here. You need to go onto Amazon, is my suggestion, and get a copy of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and read it, because it is an amazing book.
Is for people who are theists, people who believe in a deity of some sort. They believe in a god. Atheist is simply the opposite of that, in that they do not. It's not that they're angry at a god. It's not anything like that. It's just that they don't have that belief. And so when you see somebody who identifies as something like an anti-theist, that's not necessarily going against either one of those. It's kind of a different term that people kind of use that depending on who they are. I've heard different definitions, but one of them is that they're against the idea of theism. They're against the construct in general. But that's generally what I've heard. Does that help at all? Shannon, do you have anything to add to that?
Actually, I'm also going to jump in there and say, with respect to definitions, words, the two big ones that tend to get talked about are atheism and agnosticism. An agnostic is someone who basically does not see that there's any evidence to believe in a God. So if you're agnostic, agnosticism is all about evidence. Is there evidence that you see that convinces you about the God proposition? Whereas atheism is basically faith. Do you believe? So if you're agnostic, then you don't see that there's any evidence that makes sense. That doesn't believe that you have to be an atheist, because you could still believe that there's a God, even though you accept the fact there's no evidence.
Entirely, because basically, so then anti-theism is going to fall within this spectrum, theism and atheism being the bookend.
I've got to worry this is going to get really boring.
As far as your perspective, that's kind of within that spectrum somewhere. See, my only thing is talking about this as well.
I'm just moving forward to get live again.
I watch the show a lot. As far as an atheist goes, you don't believe that there is evidence.
Well, please, Fox, Doctor Who.
That theists are making statements that they're making, the beliefs that they have, and everything. But I just question that whether that doesn't actually still validate the entire. I'm not sure the word to use. The playing field.
Hold on. Sorry. Before you move on, I'm curious. What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that? I'm sorry, I lost it. You said that what validates? If we don't believe what Christians say and that we don't believe their beliefs, it doesn't mean anything about that. It means that we don't believe in a God.
But you're still operating within that spectrum, and what I'm saying is that I'm probably, because of my age, it's probably dementia more than anything else. But what I'm saying is I believe the whole thing is a function of our imagination. There is no God. There are religions that we have created as human beings over the years. They've been affected by political change, our evolution, and our growth and spiritual, if you want to refer to it as spiritual, growth and everything. And I just think that the whole idea that there is no God, it's us. And it's what we do to each other that is the function of what some people are calling a religion or God. And it just seems to me that over the centuries, there has been so much harm and death and destruction by people who are...
I'm just noticing the image behind Shannon Q.
But feel that gives them a sense of
I don't think that's a fluke.
To then treat other people like dirt. Like my
I'm curious, Hugh. Is this a new discovery that you've made, that you think that there is no God?
No, actually, and again, just to give a little bit of history, I actually was born and raised and baptized as a Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy. I was a Boy Scout. I was the quintessential Roman Catholic kid. And this has happened, actually, I was accused of Star Trek sentimentalities in my religious classes, because I went to a parochial school in high school.
Well, just to kind of keep the call short, real quick, Hugh, just so that we can kind of keep the calls a little bit shorter, so that we can get to more callers. Yeah. We just kind of like to get to the root of it, So we really like to get to what you believe now and why you believe what you believe now, rather than the past. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And what I believe right now is that this is an elaborate facade, that this is something that human beings have created because we're trying to find meaning in our lives and everything, and because we're so intimidated by the fact that those we care about and love die left and right, and we're all going to die. And I think that it's just compensating for this feeling of non-belonging. So I guess if I was going to come right down to it, I don't think there's a supernatural, and I think I am an anti-theist.
We're kind of dropping outside the issue of science here, but the point about whether you do or don't believe in something, whether you think something will happen when you die or not, will you go somewhere, will there be another aspect to your being, to whatever we are. My personal belief is that that's not true. I think that when you're dead, you're dead. So therefore, I think you need to try and make the best of this life that you're in. Don't put things off. Don't kind of think, okay, well, I haven't been brilliant, but it's okay. There'll be another aspect to my life, kind of when I move on, whatever the heck that means, and then, everything will be okay. That's just not going to happen in my view. My personal view is that you need to try and do the best you can in this life. If you want a rule, which is the one that I try to use, it's the aim of your life could be considered to be make a positive influence on other people's lives. The best that you can. We don't always get it right, of course.
That's great.
That's great.
We're happy to share that small
100 message.
Kenny.
Let's talk about today. Kenny. Hi, Kenny.
Hi, Kenny.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh,
Hi, Kenny.
good. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. You're talking to Shannon and Jenna. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I just called to meet the basic requirements of telling you who my God is and why.
Oh, neat.
Okay.
Okay. Can we start with what the definition of your God is?
The definition of my God?
Yeah, like if you had to define your God in a way that
I don't
comports
know
to
how
the
to
scripture.
define- Well, I just
Define your God?
adhere to the biblical God.
Okay, what does the biblical God look like if you define it? You believe in it, so you must understand what its components are, what it's comprised of, why it's possible.
Well,
So what's the definition of your God? Because there's multiple definitions of the Christian God, even within the Christian theological understandings. You could adhere to classical theism. So I guess the best way for me to start understanding what your perspective is to know what God you believe in, even within the paradigm of Christianity. So could you please just define the God that you believe in? And if you can't define the God, why do you believe in it?
I believe in the God that is defined in the beginning in Genesis as the I am.
What properties does it have?
Why do you have to
Being
describe it
plural.
from somebody else's point of view? Why can't you describe it from your own point of view?
Why do I?
Okay.
Well, because my
They're
God
being a
is
bit
the
aggressive
one
with
that's
it.
in the Bible. I didn't fashion it myself.
Well,
Jumping
so I'm
in
just
there,
curious, do you
give
have
him a
any
hard
experiences
time.
with this God?
I almost feel sorry for Kenny.
Well, yeah, that's why. I mean, I accepted. My parents didn't raise me as anything because my dad was a Catholic. He was German Catholic. And my mother was Presbyterian, and the doctrine of the Catholic Church is that you have to be Catholic when you're married, otherwise it's not a real marriage. So the Catholic priest told my dad that his sons were all bastards. So
Nice.
naturally my
Okay,
dad
yeah, that's a good priest.
left the church.
Yeah, well, yeah,
He was
I'm sorry, I
very
interrupted Shannon's line of
good for the day.
Yeah, so you wanted to explain to us why you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kenny, but you wanted to explain to us why you believe in the Christian God. So in order to progress the conversation, I guess right now we have an understanding that you don't know what the definition of God would be for the God that you believe in, but it comports to scripture which
Yahweh
is the
is
Bible.
self-existent God. He's the God that always existed. I mean, I don't know how anybody defines him, but he's the God that came in mortal flesh called Jesus and created the cosmos.
That sounds like a definition to me.
And almost 6,000 years ago.
So how do you know this?
6,000 years ago.
I was raised more or less an atheist because the Catholic priest told my dad we were all bastards, and so my dad kind of didn't raise us.
I assume that means to create the earth.
So
Okay.
I accepted Christ.
So he's a
18
creationist.
years old.
Right. Why?
After having
No.
learned nothing
For
about
what reason? What brought you to that? Like your backstory is. I'm sorry that. Yeah. So what I'm really interested in, what line of thinking brought you to adopting the belief, and if you're incorporating your backstory as Catholicism being something that wasn't good for you, and then you became an atheist into that story, that makes me. If you're incorporating that into your explanation as to why you believe, that leads me to believe that that component of your life fed into you adopting this belief as opposed to analysis of whether or not it's true. Is that the reason that you're telling me those things?
I'm telling you that because I was basically a blank slate when I came to Christ. I didn't know anything about religion
Okay.
at all.
Sure.
I was
So
basically like an atheist. My
Well, what do you know
parents
now,
taught me
though? What do you know now, though?
Another
Because
kick.
It doesn't sound like you have a solid definition for God.
Well, I don't know how to describe them to you because
Oh, try, Kenny.
I've
Come on,
been
boy.
a Christian for quite a while, so
So why can't you describe him?
Describe him to you. Well, I've told you he's the self-existent God. He's Yahweh. He's the God.
Well, what does that
exists
mean?
From all time.
What does self-existing mean?
Do you know?
That means he had no creator. He is
How
the
do?
creator. He's
Well, okay, so
he's the eternal
if
God.
something. Is there anything else that is self-existing?
No.
So then why are we? This is the one and only thing that you're saying that exists that was not created, and you cannot describe it, and you cannot give any kind of details about it because you say that you don't really have any experiences with it, you've just heard other people reference it. But so why are you so convinced that it even exists? That's my question. If it wasn't created and you have no evidence that it exists, why believe in it?
I never said I had no evidence.
We've asked for it and you haven't given it. Like, we've asked you to describe it, which would be...
You asked me to describe him. Didn't ask.
Okay, sorry. Not asking for description now. What is your evidence that
This is where this is going to go pear-shaped, I think.
Exists. I don't know if you can't describe it.
Well, I mean, basically all of history kind of describes theism, and
No,
that's not an answer.
Gosh.
I can say all of if I can make the exact same statement and it's ambiguous enough that it would support anything I say, that's not considered evidence. I could say all of history supports that
Anything.
all of history supports that Allah. All of history, like literally, that's everything. That's me just saying everything supports it without pointing to any connection between
Kenny.
everything
Try
and how
again.
everything constitutes support. So that's such a broad statement as to be utterly meaningless.
well, history does support Allah. I'm not saying it doesn't. History supports all of the gods. I didn't.
What about
deny any
Zeus?
of that history.
Well, but that's the thing, is it's not even that it
I
supports
like those
all of
thunderbolts.
the gods. It's that it supports all of the fairies and all of the aliens and all of the monsters and the Bigfoots and the, you know, it supports everything.
Also supports all of the atheism.
Do you understand how we could throw out that answer as evidence for anything and it'd be just as valid as what you just said? So can you give us anything that is a little bit more concrete?
Jenna looks slightly nervous.
Concrete for evidence.
Tension?
Some kind of evidence that's not just a general statement.
Not nervous, just
I don't
tense.
throw out all of history. I accept it all. I accept
Okay, so we're not talking about his. Okay, you know what? Okay, Kenny.
I bet she's trying
I am
hard.
coming to my last straw here. You cannot say that all of history supports anything, and if you give that as your answer for why you believe in a God, then that is a ridiculous reason, and I don't know what else to say to you. But can you give me any other reason other than history supports it?
Well, I can tell you why I became a Christian.
I would like to know what
Come on,
evidence you
Kenny.
have that any God exists.
Well, my threshold of evidence is lower than yours, apparently.
You don't know what my threshold is because you haven't given me anything to work with.
We're just asking you to answer the question, and so far your answer to the questions have been, and you have to. One sec, Kenny. So I just want to summarize your answers thus far. We said, can you define a God? And you said, no, not really, but Bible God. Okay, fine. Well, what evidence do you have? Literally the entirety of history and all of reality, evidently, is your evidence. And why you believed in the God, and you said, well, clearly my threshold of evidence is lower than yours. Not one of the answers that you have given have drawn a line between any sort of evidence or experience that you've had and why you even believe in God. Like right now, if somebody asked me, why does Kenny believe in God? I don't have an answer for them. And I can't just say, because history happened. Because that would be weird, right?
Well,
Yeah,
So
it would be weird.
let's say Shannon and I, hold on, let's say Shannon and I were like blank slates and we were atheists and we didn't have any beliefs in a God, and you wanted to convince us. You wanted to convince us, not just describe what you believe, but you want us to believe too, correct?
This is weird because Kenny's called in and he clearly hasn't got a plan here for what he wants to say.
How would you convince us, as two people who would like some evidence that there is a God, that it exists at all? Let's try, please, if you don't mind, to not go into the details of which religion or anything. Let's just start at square one. Let's start at any God that you believe in. Let's start with that. Why should either one of us believe that God exists?
This won't go anywhere.
well, as I said, I believe history, and I believe that
Why
the history
should
supports
we believe?
Christianity.
Can you be real though? Why do you believe it? Why
You think
should
that we should believe it just because you believe it?
Well, I accepted Christ at 18 years old, so there's not much I could have
So my
known.
question is, do you think that we should believe it just because you believe it?
Well, I'm just saying that
Oh,
Yes
didn't
or
answer
no?
the question.
want me to present
Yes
it.
or no, Kenny?
I wouldn't have it.
Kenny?
At
Yes or
18
no?
years old, what?
Yes or no?
You should believe. You should believe, babe.
Hi.
Yeah.
Should I hit the wall? I like that question. We're gonna talk to Mike. Math to prove things that cannot be proven, and I need to know what that means. So
We're hoping
hey,
this is
Poor old
the
Kenny.
area
He
that
kind of
might
walked
be
into it there.
misunderstanding you in some way.
And
very curious.
they took no prisoners.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
I mean, hi Jenna, hi Shannon. I hope you're doing fine.
Thank you.
Good, good.
I would have hung up on the other person as well. It's hard to talk about it. I'm not gonna give a course in mathematical logic.
So, what are you going to use to talk to us about?
Yeah, so I'm studying math, and it's mathematical logic. It was actually proven in 1931 by someone called Kurt Gödel. And
What was proven?
What was proven?
Okay, so if you have a set of axioms that describes the natural numbers, for example, deriving from those axioms, you can never get all true theorems, all true statements.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because I don't really have any idea what Mike is talking about. But the one thing I would say is that the word proof is used by different people to mean different things. And despite what some people think, and a lot of people don't, physics or science, in my particular interest, physics, so science uses the word proof in a very different way to mathematics. Mathematical proof is not the same as scientific proof, although they can support each other. Physicists are very cautious about the word proof. I don't really like the word proof, to be truthful. If we have an idea based on some evidence, if we take empirical evidence, practical measurements, and we come up with an idea to try and explain those, this idea then can be used to make predictions of other experiments. And so we then carry out those other experiments to basically see whether our idea might be right or not. Now, if those experiments match the predictions, which is good, that doesn't mean that your idea has now been proved. What it means is that new evidence supports your idea. Physicists try not to go down the road of talking about proving something, unlike mathematicians who love it.
So
I'm not sure I'm following.
there's some delay. It's I mean, as I said, it's theoretical mathematics. It's mathematical logic, and basically, if you have a set of axioms, so things that you assume to be true, for example, tautologies, equality axioms, stuff like that, and and everything that can be deduced from them, then there is a gap between all true statements and what can be deduced from them. So what is basically done is, in a way, things can be, even within mathematics itself, can be self-referential, and
I don't think Mike's thought carefully enough about this.
It's very hard to describe. It's credit.
Well, don't try on this kind of show then.
It's hard to describe, but basically,
Are you saying that nothing can be proven with math, or that is that what you're trying to say? That nothing really can be proven because even within math, what are you trying to say then?
No, I'm just saying that there are true statements which cannot be derived.
What does that mean? There are true statements that cannot be derived. You're saying that there's true statements that cannot be. How are you using the word true?
For example, well, you have
a set of rules, a set of mathematical rules. For example, modus ponens. This is usually used. This is if you have a statement A and you have A implies B, then you can logically follow B.
Yeah, but you need to have some argument as to why that would be. But and I don't know what follow B means.
Understanding. Are you saying that eventually you're going to get down to like a base axiom where you really kind of need to have a presupposition about it, like you exist or the universe exists, and you can't derive a mathematical formula from it? Has to be like, is that what you're trying to?
I think what's happening here is Shannon and Jenna are working quite hard to try and work out what the hell Mike is talking about, and he's come onto a program which he knows will not have mathematicians on it. And he's studying maths, although we don't know at what level. And he's constantly saying it's difficult to explain. Okay, well, don't try and explain it on a show to people who aren't mathematicians then. Go and talk to some mathematicians, because he's making a very half-assed attempt here at trying to say something, and all he's doing is creating confusion. And Shannon and Jenna have to work very hard just to try and work out what the hell he's saying. It's not impressive.
Say?
No, that there's actually also something that is proven, that you cannot add axioms in order to arrive there.
God, it's quite boring, this as well. Let's be honest.
We're getting lost here. I'm not even. To what end are we having this conversation? Are we having this conversation just to say that there are some things that math can't prove? Because I would just, prima facie, just agree with you and be like, okay, and then then we wouldn't really need to go on anymore.
No, I stated in my topic question that unfalsifiability is something that Matt often uses and a lot of people often use, and I understand it, and it works.
Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute. Falsifiability. Basically, in science, you can argue that the scientific method actually is all about falsification. I think that's not true. But you can argue that. You can argue that the process of going through a scientific endeavour to try, go from kind of not having much knowledge about something to gaining some kind of insight into it is a process of trying to falsify statements. And what that means is you can't make a statement that cannot be tested experimentally. Basically, every idea that we have that tries to explain empirical evidence, it needs to be able to generate its own testable experimentation. So, I can say that I believe, based on the evidence that I have so far, I believe that it is my view that the sun will rise tomorrow. Well, actually, I can test that. I can test that statement because the sun can be checked tomorrow. I can wait to see whether the sun rises tomorrow. If I was to say something like, I believe that the sun will always rise tomorrow, I think that's slightly harder. How would I actually test that? Because I use the word always. And how would I be able to test that? What kind of experiment can I set up that will always? Now, it might be conceivable that we could think of something, but I'm not quite sure off the top of my head what. This is this idea of you make a statement and then I can think of an experiment that can be used to try and disprove it, to falsify it. And it's encapsulated, and this is not a big deal, in something called the falsification criterion, which is basically any statement is scientific if it can be falsified, if you can think of an experiment that could be done to try to test it and try and prove that it's a false statement. Which is why if you say to me, the big one here, that I believe that there's a God that exists, or even worse, there is a God that exists, a very positive statement about it, that's not a scientific statement, because there is no experiment that I can now do to falsify your statement. If you say a God exists, okay, there's nothing I can do. There is no experiment that can be done. That is an unfalsifiable statement. Therefore, it is not a scientific statement.
But the concept of improvability is that even though some things are true, you cannot prove them. And I'm not talking about something like complexity or something. Complexity, sorry. I'm not talking about the proof would be too long or we are just too ignorant to understand. So I want to make clear that what I'm saying is not a logical fallacy from ignorance, But it's,
I think if he's arguing that there are some things you can say that appear to be true, but they're difficult to prove or impossible to prove. Yeah, okay, that's true.
It's the theorems of incompleteness within mathematical logic.
And you can earn an awful lot of money.
Well, so hold on, before you move on to other things, what are you trying to prove anything? Are you trying to prove that anything supernatural exists at all?
I think this is an attempt at education.
No, I'm an atheist just like you. But what I'm just saying is requiring proof for something is not necessarily rational.
Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you're speaking my language.
Okay, now that they look like they're getting somewhere, let me just tell you, there is something called the Millennium Prize Problems. The Millennium Prize Problems are 7 problems in mathematics that were stated by the Clay Mathematics Institute in the year 2000. The problems, there's a bunch. There's the name of the problems, which you can look them up, and the correct solution to any of the problems results in a $1 million prize being awarded. And one of them is called P versus NP, and it was the basis of one of the episodes of the Sherlock Holmes series Elementary. Really interesting. So if you want to dig your teeth into something quite tough mathematically, have a look at those and win yourself $1 million.
All right. So you're saying that math...
I don't want this to be hijacked. I don't want this to be hijacked by anyone, by any theist or something, because they probably don't understand the underlying both mathematical and philosophical consequences of those mathematical theorems, right?
Okay.
So,
may I ask, are you saying that since it kind of, I've been studying logic here and there, and I've kind of come to the conclusion after going really deeply that you come to a point where you have to use logic to prove logic. Is that kind of what you're getting at? That because of that you can't really expect people to use it?
No, I don't think that's it.
No, because there are obviously some things within logic that you can prove a lot of things using logic and using mathematics and physics and so on and so forth.
Careful, don't bring physics into it.
There usually is this notion of that there is no ceiling, right? That as long as humanity keeps going and as long as we are smart enough and there are no like a proof would not be too long or use too many atoms or something like that, that everything can be proven at some point or disproven, right? But as these theorems show, is there actually is a gap there between the theory of arithmetics, for example, which is the natural numbers, and what can be deduced from axioms. So also when we use it in our everyday simple life, if we would have some axioms and say what can we deduce from those axioms only using logic, then there's also a gap, or we would think that there will also be a gap.
I'm lost.
I think I'm gonna let you go because
move on.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of blanked out partway through there.
Sorry.
I really did. I appreciate it. I'll have to I don't have the background required.
Illegal because it would be taken.
Finding life, and some people.
Story, Solomon. I'm curious. Solomon in Washington thinks that abortion should be illegal because it would be taking a life from another person. Okay, before we hear your story, Solomon, I'm curious how you define.
Okay, I don't really have much to say about this particular issue with respect to physics, and it's almost like walking on eggshells talking about it because you're going to wind somebody up. But I would say that if any people are watching this and they're students and they're thinking about, applying for a medicine degree, then this is an issue you need to make yourself aware of, and you need to have some kind of views on it so that you can at least talk about it. If you are ignorant of the issues associated with, being pro or anti-abortion, then in an interview for a medical school, you're going to come up short.
Like life and person. Like, what is life to you and what is person to you? How do you use those words?
I guess fundamentally that's the real question here.
Yeah.
So it depends on when we define life. So I think if they're defining life, and some people define it differently than I do. For me, I define it at a heartbeat. That happens relatively early on and pretty quickly after the realization of, oh, I've missed my period. So I think pretty much around that time would be a fair time to say that would be life, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong. Other people believe other things.
So it's actually not really a heartbeat, though, when it's still in that early phase. That's an electrical impulse that registers similar to a heartbeat, but you actually don't have a circulatory system like shortly after you're impregnated. What the thing that's registering on ultrasounds as a heartbeat is actually an electrical impulse. The circulatory system, as people understand it, doesn't quite exist. So that's just a valid correction. But it's a valid and important one to note. If that is your definition of when life starts, is when it's not mine for the record, but if that is yours, you're placing it at the wrong time during fetal development. So just heads up there. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, but I thought that was important to note.
Even with that impulse.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So even with the impulse or the electrical pulse, I think it would still stand because afterwards, unless there is something to alter that, it's still going to become a human life. Like the course of it happening prior doesn't really change. Like it wouldn't be no different than a person that has a hard birth and they could potentially die, but then you have doctors who save the life and then it's still alive. You wouldn't kill the baby afterwards, or
okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So I'm curious, before we get too deep into this, is this belief based on a God belief? Is this because you think this is what a God wants, or is this actually a separate belief for you?
It's completely separate. It's not related to theism at all. But I mean, I can talk about theism. I have no problem with that.
Well, the reason is because if it is, then we should definitely talk about that instead. But if it's separate, then it's its own legitimate issue. So
whatever.
I'm sorry.
I'm down to talk about theism as well. Either is fine with me.
Well, we've already started on abortion, so we can go with that. So you think that the life starts when there is a beat of some sort, whether it's a heartbeat or an impulse or whatever. You think that is when life starts, and that is when it becomes a person, correct? Like by person, you mean somebody with like a personhood?
A personality?
Yeah, like what would be the difference between a baby, like a 4-month-old baby, and a fetus? Essentially.
Well, I would say that the 4-month-old baby has been born.
Things that require it. Sorry?
I would say that the 4-month-old baby has been born.
I would add to that also a 4-month-old baby has the ability, prefrontal cortical development required to have cognition and self-awareness. Has also been born and is self-aware, and on top of that is no longer dependent on another human being's body to exist. It is fundamentally capable of living independently, which is a notable difference when we're talking about these.
Well, so the fact is that so you hold on real quick before you move on. So you think that it should be wrong, that it is wrong, and I can understand that, but you also can understand, I think you said earlier, how other people can disagree with you, correct?
Yes, but to address that, I have to say about the 4-month-old baby.
Okay.
So the idea that a 4-month-old baby is going to survive on its own is not true.
No, that's not what she meant. That's not what Shanna meant.
For it to survive. It's still
when I say survive on its own, I mean survive without needing to be physically attached. No, 1 sec, because this is a conflation that I hear all the time. That, you know, once you have a baby, the baby requires attention and care. Like, it can't feed itself, obviously, duh, right? Once you've had the baby and you've committed yourself to taking care of the baby, that you'd be negligent to not to, right? Like, once you give birth. I agree with that. But the differentiation that we're talking about here, like the way let me start by clarifying the way that I view abortion. I view abortion as me relinquishing the right to my body to, even if I'll grant you, I will 100% grant you, for the sake of argument, just for the sake of argument, let's say that the moment of conception, like the moment that sperm hits egg, zygote forms, we'll just call that life. We'll call that human life. And just for the sake of definition throughout the entirety of this conversation, I will grant you that as a premise. Now, at what point does that life have rights that supersede my right to my own body is the question here, right? That's the important question. So once a 4-month-old baby is out, a 4-month-old baby no longer needs to be physically attached to another human and utilize their body's resources. And this would be illustrated by this argument. This is a counter to your point. The moment I give birth to a baby, let's say that baby needs a blood transfusion. That baby needs a blood transfusion. I'm the only one around who can give that baby a blood transfusion, and I am that baby's mother and just gave birth to it. Should I be forced to give that baby a blood transfusion to keep it alive? It has been alive for 1 second outside of my body. Do I have to give it a blood transfusion? Should I be forced to do that? Answer that question for me, please.
I think that's an unfair question to ask because it's not necessarily directly related. Like the actions
directly related. That baby will. No, it is. I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to let you wash over the question because it absolutely is directly related. Because your argument is that I need to use my body to provide the requirements of life for that baby. Now you're saying that when that baby is in my room, I am required to provide my body for that. But once the baby leaves my room, I am no longer required, which means that you have a double standard when you're looking at this. You're saying when the baby is inside of me, I am.
Let me back. Well, we have to step back a little bit to be able to address that.
Okay, go ahead.
So the baby has no ability to determine what it's doing in its life, right? I mean, it's not at fault here. It's not the one who chose to live. It's the person who decided to have relations and then they decided to have a baby. That's
when you get into a car, you consent to a car accident if you get in it. It's not the same. It's not the same. You can't use that as an argument. You can't say just because there is a possibility that engaging in sexual activity will result in a pregnancy that you consent to that pregnancy, that you consent to your body being used in that way, any more than you can say that there's a realistic understanding that if you get into a car, there's going to be an accident, that you consent to having an accident.
Yeah, but the person who is the victim of the accident isn't responsible for being there.
What? If I'm the victim of getting pregnant, what about a rape then? Like, the more you keep justifying why these analogies don't track, the more you're actually weakening your argument, which ultimately does boil down to bodily autonomy. It is my body, and if I do not want it to provide it to someone, I do not have to, and there is no reason that I should be forced to. Even if I make the decision, like if I let's say that even if I stabbed you, I still am not forced to give you a blood transfusion, right? If I made the choice to do that to you, I am now responsible for that happening to you. But you still, in that scenario, can't use my body to maintain your life. The only place that this argument seems to hold for people, for whatever dissonant reason I don't understand, is when it comes to a woman's body in pregnancy. Every other time, you don't have to relinquish a part of yourself. Your bodily autonomy takes precedence. But as soon as a pregnancy is involved, regardless of the stage of the pregnancy, all of that goes flying out the window because you're a mom now, you decided to have sex, and now that baby owns your body, and so do I, by the way, because I get to have a conversation with you telling you what you have to do based on my ideas and understanding about what your body is for. So you'll excuse me if I get a little bit heated when I have these conversations because I can make those decisions for myself.
Thank you for that. I hung up on him about a minute ago because he was muted a couple of times while you were talking, and he was still talking the entire time. So, thank you.
Bye.
That was never going to go well.
All right, let's see. All right, Martin. Can you hear us? What would you like to discuss today? You're talking to Shannon and Jenna.
Hello. Martin.
Hey, Martin.
We're about
Martin.
5.5 minutes behind them.
Scare you away, Martin.
Fun.
How about Jack?
Pretty well, because I've been watching the Atheist Experience for many years.
So you know us pretty well.
I'm a Canadian as well, so it's nice to talk to another Canuck. So I'll get straight to my point.
Okay.
So basically, I believe that God does provide evidence.
Ooh.
And I'm just going to use his because it's simpler, but there's feminine and masculine sides of God. But anyway, I'm going to say his. But so basically, my grandparents on my mom's side.
No. Sorry. Before you go into your story, can you clarify what you're going to do?
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about synchronicities and ways in which coincidences in our lives point to bigger truths.
So coincidences have you convinced that a God exists?
Well, interesting coincidences. I'm not talking about like my brother and I have the same birthday. You know what I mean? Like I'm not.
Just to decide what's interesting.
Minor stuff like that. Well, I'll explain it, and you can tell me whether or not it's meaningful.
Sure. Let's hear you out. What's up?
Okay. So basically, my mom lost both her parents within about 3 months due to really extreme aggressive forms of cancer. And it caused a lot of grief for her, and she actually left the church for a while. She was a Christian and Catholic. Well, she kind of was like, she didn't love Catholicism. But
he's going to waffle a lot, unfortunately, which sounds an awful thing to say, but he is.
Time, right? And she would always go to like her parents' graves to pray and talk to them. And well, they died in '94. In 2004, my dad got a job in California, and we got the chance to move to California, which is every Canadian's dream. So we took it.
What?
And my mom was really like praying as to whether or not this was a good thing. And she talked to her parents about it.
Shannon's Canadian, by the way.
Give me a sign. I just want to know a sign. Something that this is okay. So maybe a week or two later from that, my dad got our new number, the phone number in Long Beach. The number ended 3435. So okay, that's a easy to remember number. So he tells her, and my mom gets this weird instinct to kind of dig a little bit because there's this weird overgrowth. So she shortly discovers after hearing the number that the grave plots, the entire time, she didn't know the numbers. They were just put there, were 34 and 35. And, that's a 1 in 10,000 chance, like not perfect. I know like a 1 in a million chance would be more.
Oh, God.
But it was really powerful. And it was very healing for her because when she lost her parents, it really, really messed her up for a long time. And she's still, not having parents. And I only really knew my grandparents very little. They were amazing people.
Oh, please, Jack. Come on. Okay, it sounds like I'm being horrible here, but he needs to move on because
pirate ships came up the creek, and we believed them, of course.
That's sweet. So, Jack, I'm gonna stop you for a sec, though.
Pretty quiet, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. It's just we have limited time, and so I don't mean to interrupt you to be rude. You seem like a lovely person. But I do want to say that, like, if you're posturing this as some sort of proof, I can see why anecdotally a lot of people might look at something like this and it may resonate with them, right? They may say, oh, wow, that coincidence has a very strong emotional tie. So when a coincidence has a strong emotional tie like that, people...
Okay, if you took a coin and you flicked a coin and it was a fair coin and it was a fair flick and there's no fiddling going on here and it lands on a head, and then you flick the coin again and it lands on a head, and you flip the coin again and it lands on a head, so that's 3 out of 3, and then you flip the coin again and it lands on a tail. Okay, if you do it 10 times, if you had 5 heads and 5 tails, that would not really be a surprise. In fact, it's probably what you might think would happen more often than not. If it was 6 and 4, 6 heads, 4 tails, would that really surprise you? Because it shouldn't do. You can do it right now, and it won't take long to get 6 heads or tails and 4 of the other. What about if it was 7 and 3? 7 and 3. Would that really shock you? Because the odds now are starting to get heavily against that happening, what about if it was 10 and 0? You flicked a coin 10 times and you got 10 heads. Now, the chances of that happening are very, very small if it's all fair. So does that mean it won't happen? The probabilities of all the different things happening to produce us here now, the random mutations, the effects of environmental conditions, genetic mutation and natural selection to produce us here right now, what are the odds that that could happen? Surely astronomically small? No. The odds of it happening are 100% because we're here now talking about it. It came off. Coincidence is not an opportunity to let go of your rational thought at all. If you want to look at an interesting experiment on this, go onto YouTube, type Darren Brown and do something like a coin toss, and you watch him flick a coin 10 times and it comes up 10 heads, and it's not a fiddle. But it doesn't mean there's a God.
Psychologically to lean into,
and it's not evidence that there's a God.
They feel a connection. So, but when you're positing that,
please listen.
Jack, one sec. Sorry, but when you're positing that in a conversation as some sort of proof that should be compelling to somebody else, you have to understand that just couldn't be. Just the fact that you even yourself were able to say, listen, like there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that this would happen. Like coincidences like that happen every day.
Yes, they do.
So I don't understand how you would expect us to draw connections. What about telling me this story made you think that I would go, well, shit, God is real then? What? No one's ever put it to me that way before.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I realized, right? One thing I realized from all of this, and these happen to me all the time on a smaller scale, a bigger scale. But what I realized is we're never going to have sufficient evidence as to whether or not God exists. That is
Stop right there.
That's not true.
Stop right there. You just said we're never going to have sufficient evidence to believe in a God. Why would you keep going? Why would you keep going?
From the scientific method is what I'm talking about. We're never going to be able to
have a better method
where we can prove or disprove God, right?
Okay, hold on. I had something really important to say about the coincidences, because that's really the reason that you have all these coincidences that you say keep happening in your life. Please understand, there are so many words and numbers that are in your life now that have been in your life in the past. Locker numbers, cell phone numbers. Hold on, please listen to me when I'm talking just for a minute, okay? So there are all kinds of words, all kinds of foods, all kinds of emotional words. There's middle names, there's all kinds of things all over your life that can mean something is tied to you because it feels like it is, because you feel like you kind of own those words. They're a part of you. I can understand how that can feel like something is speaking to you. Something is obviously yours, speaking directly to you because of that connection. But the fact is that everybody has so many of those. And so when you think about what are the chances that I could have that kind of a connection,
what do you mean when you say so many?
I'm pretty sure I'm not done talking.
Jack, shut up.
When you ask what are the chances that something like that can happen, I'd say that they're pretty high.
Well, I want to go back to what you said, and I'm confused because you said everybody has so many of those. What do you mean when you say that? I don't really, because not everyone's a theist. A lot of people don't believe in God.
Well, what I mean is that there are so many words that could signify that a sign is reaching out to you. For example, for me, my dad used to call me Little Bird. So anything that has to do with a bird, which there's all kinds of bird stuff out there. Anything that has to do with the color pink, because that's my favorite color. There's so many things about me that make me who I am. And so I can understand how it can feel like when those words are being used, that it's trying to signify something, it's trying to tell me something, but
it isn't.
I could also understand how that's just a human desire to want to feel like you belong, to want to feel like you belong here.
I agree.
So why? So now that being said, and you having said yourself that we can never have sufficient evidence to believe this stuff, why are we going to say that because coincidences like that happen, that obviously a God exists? Because we don't find that convincing at all.
That's a great response, and I expected you to say something like that. But here's how I would respond to that. I want to kind of reframe it a little bit, because I feel like science is great at looking at our, reality as far as the three dimensions of space and one dimension of time that we can perceive. And it's a really good tool for that, but I don't think it's a great tool for asking the why kind of questions. It's great at asking the how questions of how does this work, how does that work.
What about the what questions?
Like, is there a God, or why is the universe, or whatever?
What about the what questions,
Science will never
Jack?
solve that. What do you mean, what questions? What type of
what exists?
Well, the word exists, if you just ask someone the question, what exists, that's a really hard question. Like, the shorter a question like that, like, we know we exist. I think we can all agree that existence is real, right? Like, we're talking.
So that's the thing. This is a big conversation, actually, in the atheist community. This is a very big topic on what is real, what exists, what is true. Because when we really, really dig down deep, it gets really confusing. But that's the thing, is that it just gets more confusing. We don't find more answers.
I'm just going to pause there for a quick comment. I think that one of the points that's raised there is the why question. You can look, as a physicist, I can look at the world and I can identify the fact that there are a set of rules in our universe. That seems to be certainly true. Because of repetition, because when you set situations up and then you repeat them and you see what happens, I hold an object and I let go of it and it falls, and I keep doing it and I keep doing it and it keeps falling, and as long as I repeat the experiment and don't change the conditions, it will keep falling. That suggests to me that there's a rule that means that if I hold a pen here and let go of it, it will fall. And we try to investigate those rules to try and come up with the rules that make the universe work the way that it does. That's what science, and in particular physics, is trying to do. It would be nice to be able to say why, and really, I can ask the question why does the pen fall, and then I can make up an answer. It's got mass, the Earth's got mass, everything with mass attracts everything else with mass by a force we call gravity, and the gravitational force is only attractive, and I can say that, so I can kind of answer the why questions. But what I can't do is answer the question, why is the rule that I'm proposing, why is that a rule of the universe? Where did they come from? Why are the rules of our universe the way they are? I can't really ask that question, or I can, but I'm not expecting an answer and won't get an answer. It would be like imagining that the process of physics, as Richard Feynman would point out, is a little bit like watching a game of chess, and simply by watching it, imagine you've never seen the game of chess before. Simply by watching the game, you try to work out what the rules are. And you can watch it as much as you like, but you're not allowed to ask the players anything about the reasons why they make the moves. You've got nothing but visual observations of the pieces and how they move. That's all. And the question, can you work out the rules of chess just by watching the game of chess? And the answer is, well, probably if you watch enough of them, yeah, you probably could. But that does not in any way answer the question, why does a bishop move diagonally in chess? The answer is because it does. That's it. There isn't really much of a better answer than that. The bishop moves diagonally because it does, because it's a rule of the game. That's it. Okay, so you have to be a little bit careful when we discuss the word why and how that fits into science, because there are certain statements or questions, statements that we can make about the universe, and asking why those statements seem to be correct is not a question that we can answer.
Yet.
We find more questions. Every time we answer a question in the scientific community, we open up 15 more questions.
Right.
Of course.
It's an interesting theory. I studied the history of science, and every time you learn something new in the scientific community, you open up 15 more questions. So actually, over time, the percentage of questions we know the answer to goes down.
I would agree with that.
Questions open up every time we
So what?
And that's the problem with
What's that got to do with anything?
My humble
Jack, one sec. Because I don't understand how you're not seeing what I think both Jenna and I see here, which is you're saying there are so many questions that are unanswered that it's unreasonable to say that we know answers to questions. But then simultaneously, you're saying here's something that we can't. There's really no way for us to empirically prove.
Jack's got a problem, hasn't he? He can't shut up.
We're the unreasonable ones when we're saying, yeah, there's all of these unanswered questions that we don't have the answers to, and you're saying, well, there's this one thing that we really can't even.
There's a very simple way of thinking about that. The more we know, the more we're able to ask questions about it.
That's the reasonable question. You see?
That's a very fair response. I appreciate that you said that, Shannon, because I think it can be very confusing when I talk to people because I use a lot of terms in different ways. But what I'm trying to say at its core, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, is that believing in God is something I do out of more of a belief in my heart, not in my head. Like, there's some things I believe in my head.
Okay,
like,
all right, yeah.
You know, math.
That's fair enough if that's what he wants to believe, but that's not going to convince anybody else.
So you're just saying you have an emotional connection to it. That's in your head too.
It's interesting because your gut bacteria contribute to your cognition, as does aspects of your heart function.
Come on,
so
Jack.
does this gut bacteria
Time to
only
move on.
apply when we're trying to investigate a God belief?
But what I'm saying is this, right? So sometimes you got to think with your head, sometimes you think with your heart, sometimes you think with your gut.
You never think with your heart.
All of it's in your head. That's nonsense to me.
It is absolute rubbish he's
Shannon's
talking
got a
now.
psychology degree. She's studying. Hold on, Jack. You have on the line a woman who has actually studied the human brain. Okay, have you actually studied the human brain?
I have bipolar disorder, so
that doesn't tell me anything that you've studied.
Well, I was sent to the hospital 6 times, and I've seen.
What's that got to? Oh, Jack, come on, wake up, man.
Oh my God! Do you think that because you've been to the hospital 6 times that you understand how the human brain works?
Of course not. I can't even begin to fathom the depths
Right,
of the
okay,
human brain.
move on then.
Okay, so that is my point. You can't even fathom the depths of the human brain, and here we have somebody who can help you understand the depths of the human brain. Somebody who can help you understand why we don't actually think with our gut and our heart. We actually think with our brain. Do you have any questions for Shannon?
I have a question for Shannon. If you were to decide whether you want to marry someone, a man or a woman, I don't know you very well.
Could be either. Now you know. Go ahead. I'm
not going to make assumptions, but anyway.
Get on with it.
I just declared it, so no need.
The day before, right? The day before, are you going to run through a mental checklist of all of the things and say yes, no, and then if it sums up more than 50%, you marry them? Or are you going to make a more intuitive choice? Now, I know it's metaphorical, right?
Whoa. Hold on. You asked your question, and now she's going to answer it.
I'll let her.
No, Jack, I will mute you.
She'll do it, Jack. She's not messing around.
You asked a question, and now you give her time to answer.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Okay, so Jack, your question essentially boils down to, if I'm understanding it, when you're in a highly emotional situation, are you going to think emotionally or logically or some combination of the two? That's what the question seems to be trying to tie itself into, right? So I'm getting married. What factors into my decision about getting married? Now, the answer is going to be different. Like, if you look at some research about, like, people who get married, like, first and second marriages, the factors that determine what their decision-making process is going into marriage changes. And the reason it changes is because of experience. And once people have experience, they understand that just relying solely on emotions to make decisions isn't always the best idea, because it lands them in outcomes that they wouldn't have seen otherwise because they weren't carefully considering. and that result in them not having aspects of their lives being happy, right? So the answer to that question is I've already been married once, and I engaged in that marriage probably more emotionally than logically. And if I were to go into a marriage again, likely because of the progression of my cognitive understanding of what the outcomes are going to be resulting of that marriage, I would do a more careful tabulation of the compatibility between myself and the other person, and engage in that differently. So what that would highlight for me, I think, is actually the opposite of what I think you're attempting to prove here. What you're attempting to prove here is that we make emotional decisions that result in happiness, but that's not always the case. Making emotional decisions is actually solely emotional decisions. Sometimes feels right because it feels being the operative term, feels a certain kind of way. So we think that good feeling that we have at the moment somehow is reflective of the accuracy of our decisions, or like the efficacy of them and the long-term viability.
I'm going to move on because
but your question itself highlights that that's not
we're 11
case.
minutes behind
So
live, and I think this is not going anywhere.
Because there's something called supposed to go to your brain.
Obviously, if you want to watch that bit, you can.
It's okay. Well, our awareness, our consciousness, our thinking process.
He's still going on about the same thing. Sorry, Jack.
Yeah, electrical impulse required. You're saying that there's something that exists outside of us that is us, and that our brain is just the receiver for that, right?
Well,
the brain is just the receiver.
Right. I believe that.
Okay, that's what you initially said.
Well, I believe that. So what I'm trying to say is that I believe God is essentially the source of all consciousness.
Okay, hold on, Jack, hold on really quick. I'm so sorry. Shannon just explained a whole bunch to you about how the brain works and the functions, and she's studied. That's the evidence that we have. She's studied this, right? Can you explain a God in any kind of a similar fashion? Can you give us information the way that she did?
Because I don't have a degree in psychology, and I'm not nearly as educated as her.
So do you think that you needed a degree in psychology to believe in a God?
No, I don't. I actually think that a lot of times people, it's interesting because a lot of scientists believe in God.
Not many.
Not a lot, but that's not the point. That's a completely separate argument.
Well, fair enough.
No, Jack, that's a separate argument. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about why you believe there is a God, even though you can't explain it.
Well, I took shrooms about a month ago, so.
Oh God, okay.
Like the evidence that we just discussed.
He took mushrooms. That's just brilliant.
And then
for a while,
I feel like we're just about to get to something. Like it's okay. I'm on an item, and I don't.
And in California, it says, you're an atheist. Do atheists have the duty to attempt to deconvert people? First, I'd like to know what you think, Christian.
What's up, Christian?
Hi there. This is my first time making it onto the call. The Atheist Experience actually got me questioning 4 years ago. I'm only 20 years old, but in Catholic school, it got me to kind of deconvert.
Wow.
And so for a while, my approach to it was really just like, I guess, agree to disagree, let it be, because in a Catholic school, I heard this all the time, from family, from friends. And, in our society, we hear it all the time, people thanking God, people praying all over the place. So it's not like I'm going to go up and debate everyone on the street, right? With my pocketbook of street epistemology. But, sometimes I feel like it is important to bring it up, right? So I wanted to see, I've only been an atheist for about 3 or 4 years now. And I wanted to see more like veteran atheists to see what your experience with that is. Just if you've ever had to go through that, like maybe I shouldn't say anything, or like maybe this is a chance to get someone to like see a breakthrough or something.
Well, you've been an atheist longer than I have.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So Shannon.
So yeah, what do you have to tell Jenna? You're like, what advice do you have for Jenna? I've been an atheist for longer.
So would you'd like to know what we both think? Is that what you're trying to say?
Right. I don't know what your position is on that, and how you go about it in your daily lives, that kind of stuff.
Shannon, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, a cat came to visit me. Currently holding a tiny cat. She's gone now. So I would say it's entirely dependent upon the situation that you're in, right? Like, if you going out, street preaching on the corner, like about why people should be atheists and making every conversation you have about belief is a really quick way to just entirely alienate yourself from a lot of people. So I think you have to pick your moments. The moments that I pick to be the advice that I give outside of like this online realm where I engage in it just on a pretty consistent basis, because it's kind of what I do as an activist here, which is different than just like a regular, somebody who wants to have these conversations day to day. Very different, right? You're going to conduct them in a different manner, because you're not just thinking about what that person believes. You're thinking about relationship retention with that person, which requires a completely different engagement strategy. And something I see a lot is that people use the same sort of engagement strategies that they see modeled on shows like this when they're in their real life with people, and that's not always the best fit based on the way that relationship dynamic works. So I guess my advice would be assess the relationship dynamic and augment your engagement strategy based on that. But my view of it is, I don't necessarily bring it up, but when I see it brought up and it is causing harm in my real life, or it has the potential to cause harm, I engage at that point. But I don't come in hot to family dinners going, guess what, guys? I don't even think that Jesus rose. You know what I mean? Hey, everybody, gather around. We're going to talk about how the philosophical definitions of God are all incoherent and don't comport with Scripture. You know what I mean? You gotta figure out a strategy, I guess, would be my best advice, and those are going to be
right. That's exactly where I'm at with it right now, because so I don't know, I care about other people. I care about the society that I share with other people. So, if in an everyday conversation, if someone points or says something that's wrong, or I point it out, or I'm able to point it out, I'll point it out, right? Just because,
right.
I don't, want them to keep holding false belief. But if it's held so deeply and by so many people in our society, it becomes very different. So like you said, like, I'm not going to go up, to like my grandma on Thanksgiving and be like, your, beliefs are, unsubstantiated.
Right.
Yeah, when your dad, right, Grandma? Like, that's just not a thing that you do.
Yeah. If anything, I'd say that family situations are almost the last time that you want to start talking about that, because you've got so much history with them. There's so much emotion there already. So personally, I think family gatherings, especially, last place. First place would be, just a casual conversation with a friend that you haven't seen in a while, and they're wondering what's going on, and you're catching up. I personally just kind of casually mention it and then see if they're interested in discussing it further. And if they ask me a question, then I know that they're interested. But which typically they just don't say anything. If they don't say anything, then I just move on. I don't want to pressure people into having that conversation, because one, that puts their guard up against me, and two, that puts their guard up against any kind of questioning. So I personally just like Shannon said, try to gauge the situation, try to determine when it's appropriate. The thing is that I probably take every opportunity, because there is so much harm. Like, even if it's, say it's like an extended family gathering, like, I don't know, like a birthday, something that's a little bit more casual than Thanksgiving or something. And, there's an aunt and uncle in from out of town, you haven't seen them for a while, whatever. I love bringing that up, and then just kind of in a nice, friendly way, saying something like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, in a nice way. And sometimes they're a little bit more interested in taking me up on that, if you try to show them that you're not going to be like, okay, so now we've got to discuss. We've got to take this seriously.
Right,
like,
okay. I feel I think that's really good advice. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What actually got me thinking about this more recently, a particular experience, was that I was around step family, and someone told me that, like, oh, you should start going to church, and I just said, oh, well, I'm not really religious.
Perfect.
And she said, well, you should be, and it just ended like that. And, I've heard from other people in the family that I'm not, I guess, her favorite anymore. So I don't know.
That wouldn't have ended like that to me. You're a nicer person than I am. I would have that in that situation. That's not you bringing it up. It's an entirely different situation. That's somebody using your lack of belief as a cudgel to create an impression of you as a person, and that is something that you should like. You should never, ever like if you have the emotional bandwidth for it, allow somebody the room in your life to do that to you, because that can be abusive, right?
Right, like you say that you're not her favorite person anymore, but it should be you kind of taking a stance for yourself, or it could be you saying, please don't enforce your beliefs on me, or please, that's a personal subject.
Or a question I would ask would be, okay, if we're judging each other based on our beliefs, should I think differently of you because you believe differently of me? Like, that would be a good mirror question. So is that what we're basing our assessments of each other on? Is this the way that we should be formulating relationships? Because it's going to tell you a lot about how that person does come to determinations on relationships, or it'll tell that person a lot about how they form those opinions that they maybe weren't aware of previously themselves, because they just take for granted because society kind of has this monopoly on religion being a synonym for virtue, that when you say that you're not religious, that somehow means you lack virtue as a result, because they're seen as so synonymous. So when you push that in their face in a gentle way by saying, well, could you explain to me what about me not believing in God changes anything about me? Should we be basing how our relationship operates on what we do or do not believe? Why is a God belief different than other beliefs when it comes to us having disagreements? That those would be good mirror questions to highlight to that person, that, hey, are you really making the best decision here? Are you sacrificing a relationship because you have faulty thinking? And if their answers are unsatisfactory, it'll tell you about whether or not that's somebody you need to distance yourself from.
Amen, sister.
Amen.
Hey, you know what? This is on YouTube forever.
Forever and ever and ever. Amen.
Yeah, definitely think about some things. And then I just have one more thing I wanted to talk about before you guys hang up on me. So Shannon, you mentioned that, like, if it's something that's like, I don't know, it causes harm, or someone's in danger because of it, you're probably more likely to I don't know, try to persuade them otherwise, right? Or be like, hey, this is wrong. The way I see it, religion is very harmful, and I think it does more harm than good. So what do you think about it in terms of that? Because like my grandma, I don't really talk to her too much anymore, and I've kind of just
This is a lovely call.
All right. You want to pick the next one? I think I picked the
Okay.
We are live.
Sure. We can pick one more. Oh, we're calling out. Evidently, what's happening? We lost a screener. I think they're back in now. Okay. Oh gosh, I'm not ready. Okay. Oh no.
Call in studio.
Oh, I see. I think I can see them. Okay. We'll talk to David. I think this will probably be the last one too.
Okay.
Hello, David. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, what would you like to talk about today? You're talking to Shannon and Jenna. I couldn't pronounce my own name there. Shannon. Shannon.
Well, how much time do we have?
9 minutes. Unless you frustrate me sooner. What would you talk about?
I just wanted to say that pretty much everybody, atheists and Christians and whoever's in the world, we all operate on faith.
How
What
do
does
you
that
know
mean?
Because from the time we're born, everybody's just assimilating information, and how do we determine whether that information is true or not?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop that for a second. Faith is believing something without evidence. We're not functioning on that. You have to an extent. You have to start making judgments about the way that you want to interact with the world, and you're taking in evidence constantly. You put your hand near the fire and it starts to feel hot. You put it a bit closer, it gets even hotter. If you don't take the information that's being given to you, you're going to damage yourself and you'll never do it again. We're constantly taking in information. We're not living our life based on faith. That's rubbish.
How are you using that word faith?
Well,
Okay, I'm going to pause as well because I want to say something else about the issue of faith. Students have said to me, with respect to physicists, that physicists, I think they meant scientists, but physicists have faith in science. I even had educated people who should know better have also said that to me, and it's absolute rubbish. Scientists do not have faith in science. We do not need faith in science. We do not need to believe that the scientific process works without having evidence for that. In fact, it's absolutely the opposite of that. We very much do not have faith, do not want faith. Faith should have nothing to do with the scientific process. We believe that science works, that it is a good method of trying to make progress in our understanding of the world around us because we have evidence that it works, not because we have faith in it. Scientists do not have faith in science. We have huge amounts of evidence that the scientific method works.
We're trusting our parents when we're young. They're training us to do something, and so we're just.
Are you using faith as a synonymous word for trust?
Well, in that situation, I would say, yeah, I'm trusting my parents.
So in what situation would it not be trust?
Because, well, if you knew the information, it wouldn't be trust.
So I'm trying to define
It's not faith then either, is it?
I'm trying to get your definition of faith. And you said that it's like trust. And so I'm trying to understand if I can use the word trust instead of the word faith, if those mean the same thing to you. If they don't mean the same thing, then I'd like to know what the word faith means.
Well, I'm using it the same way you use it to believe anything you believe.
You don't know how I use it, so I'd like to know how you use it. And then I'll tell you if I use it the same way.
Well, I'm telling you, as a child, I just accepted and trusted what my parents told me, that it was
So
true.
are you using faith as a synonymous word for trust? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so then why don't we do, I can agree, we all trust. We can agree on that. We use the word faith differently. So I think that if this is a semantical error, if that is all you're trying to say, is that everyone trusts.
Well, I'm trying to say that we all learn things, and a lot of us learn things that are not true, and we accept them as true from the time we're born.
That is correct.
That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
And so even you have a criteria by which you judge everything that you learn.
Yes, I do.
So you judge everything that you have judged everything that you learned by whatever information that you've accepted. You're the one that determines whether the information that passes by you is acceptable to you.
Correct.
Or not. You don't know whether it's true.
Are there better and worse
Whether it's true
systems
or not.
are there better and worse systems to determine whether or not something you know is true? Or are they all equivalent? Because it sounds like you're saying that we all do it the same way, which I think is what you're trying to do. You're trying to say all of us have to trust at some point, and because all of us have to trust, we're all in the same boat, and you and I just did the same thing and came to different conclusions. But that's not necessarily the case. What we're saying is that we're using this sort of like epistemic framework that requires a higher burden in order for us to now incorporate that information that you may be taking on trust as something that we perceive as real or actual or true. You're saying that I am still in a position and currently see it as a viable strategy to know things, to just trust. And I'm saying that although it's something that I have done in the past and something that potentially I still do every once in a while now, I don't see that as the best possible framework for knowing things. And when I can help it, I apply a different strategy in order to verify the things that I learn as something that I should perceive as knowledge. Can you see the difference?
And we've actually seen evidence of harm that has come from people using that method.
She means trust.
Because we believe lots of things that are not true. So, and that's just the way people are. They're not.
Yeah.
They don't know anything. So, they're like I said, they assimilate this information. They don't know whether it's true. And so how do you judge whether something is true or not?
Logic.
Yeah, I do source methodology a lot too. Doing source methodology, I think, is an important thing.
What is that?
Source methodology? Oh, so if I hear something, sorry, I think Jenna was asking me a question. I'll just answer it super quickly and I'll let you go. But source methodology is finding the ultimate source of the claim that somebody is making. So yeah, so if somebody says, hey, on Facebook or whatever, hey, did you hear that blah, blah, blah election, blah, 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 like you follow that trail back to the original source so that you can analyze it based on the context it was originally utilized. Yeah.
So
sorry,
then David, sorry, thank you. So then David, so then that's the thing, is that we can all use many different ways to try to find out what's true, but that's the thing. We want to try to investigate what are the best ways. And since I discovered that we are wrong about so many things, since I didn't think that at first, and then I found out that all of us are wrong about, hold on. All of us are wrong about a lot of things. And so that's why I try to take the stance of I don't know on most things until I can find more information.
But you used to be a Christian, so how did you determine whether what the information that you were using as your logic to judge the Christianity was true or not?
So that's the thing, is after I started investigating that, I found out that I didn't actually have a reason. I found out that my only reasons for believing in the religion that I was brought up in was, one, my family told me to, and two, everyone pretty much that I knew and kind of in my circle believed it too. Those are two major fallacies on whether or not it is a solid reason to believe something. And so I found out I didn't have a reason. So that's why now I am desperately trying to find out what everyone's reason is, because I found out everyone's got a different reason. So now what I'd really like to know is, what is your reason?
What is my reason for believing?
Yes.
Well, I didn't remember saying what I believed in, but I believe.
Well, do you believe in a God?
Yes.
Why do you believe in that God?
I believe.
Because I found that's the thing. You think that I had a reason and that was good, but I lost that reason. What I'm telling you is that I discovered I never had one. What is your reason?
Yeah,
Come on,
you
David.
never prove that.
So what is your reason?
What you believe was true or not.
So no. Now we're not talking about me anymore. We're talking about you. What is your reason?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Well, my logic is based on the information I receive, just like your logic is based on the information you receive. I choose which information I choose to deem as true.
Right.
I
in my own head.
think that most of the stuff, if we look at society today and look at most of the stuff that's going on today with all the politics.
David, you're not answering my question. David, you're not answering my question.
I'm sorry.
What is your reason?
Why do I believe?
Yeah.
I believe because God showed me at a very young age that He was real. I mean,
who did?
My.
Hold on, who did?
God.
God told you at a young age that He was real?
I didn't hear His voice. No.
So then how did this happen? Please, I need more details than that. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I'm gonna need a lot more evidence than just God told me to. You know what I mean?
I accepted Christ when I was 18, and
so what is your reason? David.
Either David doesn't understand the question or can't answer it or is afraid to answer it.
I know that you're trying, and I really appreciate it. And it just seems to me like I may have caught you off guard a little bit with that question, and that you don't necessarily have an answer prepared already. Would you like some more time to go and think about what your reason is?
No.
We'll answer it.
Okay, then can you give it to me straightforward? Just like my reason was that I was told to believe it by people that I knew and trusted, and everybody that I encountered basically believed it as well. Those were the main reasons that I believed. Those were not logical reasons. So what are your reasons so we can investigate them as whether or not they are logical reasons to believe in something?
It's perfectly logical to believe in Jesus based on what your parents told you.
No, it's not.
No, it's not logical. No,
we all learn.
No, that's
we need to talk about why
your parents are bad people. What if your parents tell you to believe? What if your parents had told you to believe in the devil?
What if your dad was Hitler?
If you're using that logic, you're just like literally what you're saying is, we should just accept what our parents say to us is true. That's reasonable, and that blows my mind.
Do you hear
No,
yourself?
but
Do
I
you really think that
I
though?
don't really have any choice. I don't really have any choice in that situation.
Of course you do.
Well, why
I have the
not?
information they give me. I only have the
Well, he's like an
information-
automaton. He's like a zombie.
You think that your parents cannot possibly be wrong?
Well, I think everybody can be wrong. I'm
Right,
just
okay.
saying
Why
that
are your parents unique
I-
in that you trust
I
no matter what they say?
I'm just saying that my information is limited, especially at years old. I don't know much,
You're not 18
So-
now.
and so I have.
Okay, so hold on. So
But
you're an
I was.
18-year-old
I
with
was.
parents. So hold on. So you're an 18-year-old with parents. Why should you? And I mean, any 18-year-old with any parents, good, bad, whatever. You're saying that no matter what, because you're 18, you have to accept everything that your parents tell you as truth, as solid fact, just because they're your parents?
Well, I only have the information they give me and what I've learned in
Of course you
school, and
don't.
I
What about
know
the rest
what
of the
I learned in
world?
school was true
There's lots
either.
of information
I
out
learned-
there.
Have you ever heard of skepticism?
Yeah, I used to be a skeptic.
What
Before I
is
was
a
18.
skeptic? What does skeptical mean?
I still am pretty skeptical. I need evidence generally when it's like for climate change, I need evidence for that. I can't just believe that some scientist said it's true. I need evidence.
God damn it.
Okay?
Oh god.
Same thing with evolution.
But we're not
and
talking
everything
about
else.
we're
I
talking
need
about your
evidence.
parents. Hold on, stick to the subject, please. We're trying to figure out whether or not you should blindly accept what your parents tell you. And we are under the impression that it is absolutely a bad idea because your parents can be anybody, and you and I both agree that anybody is wrong all the time about something. Right? So you should not just trust your parents, correct?
Well, I have to trust them to a degree because they love me enough to take care of me till I was 18.
What if you don't? What if they hate you?
They don't.
Well, what if they do? Because you're making a blanket statement for everybody on the planet just because it can apply to you. Do you realize that?
No, I think that applies to everybody. If their parents
Oh
love them,
god, David, please.
And if they don't,
for
they
them.
just don't count.
This is such a
So you're
bad call
setting
for
up a
David.
special set of circumstances where you're saying, okay, nobody else should do this. This isn't really a good way to acquire knowledge, but my mom and dad loved me. So, and then that's another whole separate set of a fallacy
Yeah.
too, right? Because you're also saying, like, even if we grant you that you have this special set of circumstances that exist just for you and no one else should have it, where you can trust your parents because they love you. Like, we'll grant that, right? But that still doesn't make them right. Right? That still
Well,
doesn't set up a criteria from which we can look to say, how do we assess and determine whether or not the information being presented to us is right or wrong? What framework can we utilize for that? Saying people who love me can feed me information and I should just believe it is not only fallacious, it's dangerous.
Do you
Whether
see
your
that?
parents love you or not,
I think-
they could love you
I
and
think-
be wrong.
Do you see what she's saying, David?
I think you're. Yes, Shannon, you're absolutely perfect.
Oh my god!
I agree.
I'm gonna hang up. I'm not perfect. I'm tired. I'm cranky. And that when somebody responds to what I'm saying, like, I am not perfect. There's the amount of things I don't know is the size of the universe, and the amount of things I do know could probably fit in a thimble comparatively. I understand that, and I have been wrong 1.5 billion times, probably 7 times today, and I've probably said 5 things wrong on this call. Me saying that just trusting somebody, irrespective of whether or not they love you, to feed you information and to just assume that that information is true and that is a viable and realistic, reasonable way to determine the truth of reality is not an acceptable way to look at the world. It's not me saying that I am perfect and have perfect knowledge and can acquire perfect knowledge. I am essentially just saying almost any system's better than that fucking one.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry, I'm cranky. I'm tired.
Well, it is the end of the show, actually. So one more time, I want to thank the crew because they're just kind of awesome, you know.
Amazing. We love
Oh,
you.
I love you all. Oh no.
And you're funny.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope that you
Okay,
had a
and
good time.
I'm going to
and
stop
we'll see
that
you next
now,
week.
and see you next time.